Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Medley, the CEO for the Colorado Society of CPAs. I'm joined by my colleagues, Tiffany's not here yet. Oh, maybe there she is. Stacy Svensson and Kelly Davis, who are a part of the group that supports our diversity, equity, and inclusion working group, which has planned the CME series. We've been running these programs since June of last year, and we so appreciate all of you who have returned, as well as all of you who are here for the first time. Please know that this series will continue. The working group is very excited that already future events have been planned. But today is extra special because we have Cody Bear with us, who is going to be speaking on breaking down barriers as a blind CPA. And Cody, as I just said to you before we got started, I don't want to take away any of your airtime, so I am not going to read your bio. I know you're disappointed about that. I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell your story. And remember, everyone, we are scheduled to go till 1:15 Mountain Time. So there's plenty of time for Cody and plenty of time for your questions, which I encourage you to post in the chat, and I will monitor that, as well as just let us know by raising your hand or unmuting yourself and saying, I have a question. So with that, Cody, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. I'm really honored to have been given this opportunity to speak to everybody today. As Mary kind of alluded to in the description of the presentation, as you saw when you registered, I am a blind CPA and have been completely blind since birth. It was caused by a rare genetic disorder. It's called Leber's congenital amaurosis, or abbreviated LCA for short. At the time, I think there were 3,000 people in the United States that had the genetic condition. I don't know what those numbers look like at this point, but it results in blindness, usually from birth, and can result in a plethora of other issues. But I really just got the blindness from it, which is, I was lucky in that respect. But I currently work as a manager in the specialized tax services practice at PwC. So I've been there for just a little over a month, so kind of in a new role right now as well. But starting kind of, I'll just kind of walk through my story and kind of how I got to where I did. And if anytime people have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll be happy to address any questions. As I said, I was born blind. My parents were pretty young when they were parents. Neither of them, I grew up in upstate New York, north of Syracuse. If you were to go much more north, you would be in Kingston, Ontario. So when I always tell people from New York, they're assuming that I'm from the city, but really I grew up in a town of 700, very highly agricultural economy, and a lot of like trades type professions. I think weird fact about the town is there were more dairy cattle in the town itself than there were people that lived in the town. But that said, neither of my parents had college educations. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, and my father worked construction. And I think they were surprised when they had me and my sister, because they were trying to have one kid, and instead they ended up with twins. And then to add that on top, I was blind and my sister was completely sighted. She had no vision issues whatsoever. So I think my parents got a little nervous from just having budgeted for only having one kid. And I know my dad like took on a couple extra jobs at that point, and then eventually went on to start his own construction business. And the business did really well in upstate New York and kind of grew to be one of the larger companies in that was in construction in upstate New York. So growing up, like there was never really an expectation for me or my sister that we would go to college. It was my parents had high expectations for us, but it was more around, just us being able to work hard and provide for ourselves. My father luckily was pretty successful, and I would say we grew up, middle to higher middle class. But he had to work really hard to be successful. Like I remember a lot of times, like my mom was lucky enough to be a stay-at-home mom, but a lot of times, like my dad would come home from for dinner and then have to go back to work after dinner and sometimes be gone till after we went to bed at night. But having grown up, like my parents always had high expectations for me, but that said, like they didn't really know how to raise a blind child because they didn't know any blind adults that were successful. So they did kind of, like a lot of research around it. And I was lucky enough to learn Braille in elementary school at the same time that all of my sighted friends learned print, and was able to keep up pretty well in school, and really kind of started to develop an interest in business, and definitely started learning some things from my dad and just overhearing conversations of stuff that he was doing. And then by the time it got to high school, my sister had an entry level job, and it was just harder as a blind person to get like an entry level job to kind of make some extra money on the side. So my dad kind of took me on, and I ended up like working construction for a couple of summers. And a lot of the work that I was doing was tearing off and laying shingles on roofing, and it was hard work. Like what I had to do was just be kind of smart about where I was on the roof, and always like when you're tearing off, keep the shovel or whatever you had to tear the shingles off of the roof in front of me so that I wouldn't, if I was getting close to the edge, I would touch it with that and know to kind of back up a little bit and not fall off the roof. But I mean, that said, like it was hard work, and it was something to do in the summer, gave me some extra spending money. So it was a good experience. And I think, a lot of times, like in a small community, the role was, that sons would kind of take over their father's businesses. And that was kind of where I kind of saw myself going after high school. And then that said, around 2009, all of that kind of changed when, the economy, the housing recession happened, and work really slowed down in upstate New York. And if any of you have ever been to upstate New York, you'll know that up there, the weather is 9 months of winter and 3 months of not very nice weather that we call summer. So my parents had been wanting to get out of upstate New York for ever since we were kids, but they grew up there and never really like had a good chance to get out. And then when the construction slowed down, my dad had a high school friend out in Colorado in like the Glenwood Springs area, and went out to visit, and he kind of did some exploration in Colorado, and he was able to find an opportunity to do some help with some developments of housing that was finish the development up after another developer had lost the development to a foreclosure up in Greeley. So he took that opportunity and moved us all out to Greeley. So I then finished my I did my sophomore year of high school in New York. So came out to Greeley, finished my junior and senior year of high school, but in Greeley. But that said, like at that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do career wise, or like I've never really had the push to go to college. Like my parents encouraged it, but didn't care all that much. So that said, like I did okay in school. So I was like, well, maybe I should give it a try. Like I worked hard junior year, got good grades, and then kind of started taking some classes at the community college in Greeley my senior year, did relatively well in them, and knew that I, at that point, wanted to do something business related, and then had didn't really know what business related though, and then got to thinking about it, and I decided that I wanted to do accounting just because there was that, like, technical background with it. Easy, it felt like it'd be a good path to get a job out of college. So that said, went to UNC and got good scholarships. Just joined as a freshman and accounting major. And at that point, I think I was a little overconfident in myself from having good grades in high school, because I got to college and my first semester was probably one of the hardest semesters of my life. I had taken 18 credits, which is a lot of credits, because I was a little overconfident. And at that point, I struggled a lot. Like, it was way faster paced than high school. And like, it was in high school, everything, like all the accommodations that I needed were given to me. And there were people that figured all that stuff out for me and how to get them. So in college, I had to learn like how to advocate for those accommodations and how to like speak up and get the things that I needed to be successful in college. So I would say my first freshman year wasn't as fun and, maybe glorious as everybody makes it out to be, where you don't really have to put that much work in and kind of get to party all the time. Mine was definitely really hard. And but that said, I ended up finishing up with a 3.5 GPA that semester, and I definitely learned some things that really held applicable to me throughout the rest of my college career, and was able to kind of get down together a system that worked for me in future semesters, and was able to do well at UNC. And kind of throughout that time, I was, wrestling with all the same questions that everybody does as a college student: is trying to go public accounting, trying to do something private, audit and tax. And then I joined well, first of all, I didn't even know that audit existed. Like, accountants to me was like where my parents took their taxes every year. So that's out of the gate, that's what I thought I was getting into. And I Professor Greiman, who's actually on the call, last semester of my freshman year, talked me into joining the Deloitte tax competition. So I did that, and I really liked that. Like, enjoyed tax a lot. So decided for me, even before taking my first tax class, that tax was what I was going to do. So that's how I made that decision. And then said kind of had some internships throughout college, and learned a lot, and then knew that since I was going to do tax, I wanted to do the DU tax program. So I did that, and at that time concurrently studied for the CPA. At that time, DU, like, I mean, I think I was pretty prepared for it. The accommodations that I really used there were just having materials put in a digital format for me, as well as extra time on task. But the CPA, like, was definitely really tough for me. I took it with essentially minimal accommodations, and the way that I took it was somebody reading all. I had the extra time, thankfully, but I took it with somebody reading all of the exam questions to me and had to verbalize the answers to all of the questions back. So, right, for the multiple choice, maybe not a big deal, but imagine like actually trying to describe some of these simulations at the time, where to put the debits and credits to somebody who doesn't know accounting at all. And that was definitely difficult for me, but I got through it. I had tried to request it in a digital format at the time, but it got denied by NASPA because they didn't. I think I was one of the first blind people to take the CPA, and they just didn't really know how to accommodate that. And at the time, I think 20 or 21, and probably didn't do the best job of advocating for it. And I had an offer to join KPMG, so I had wanted to just get it done. I was like, okay, like I can get through it with a reader, but it was something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody else going forward do. And I think NASBA actually settled a court case from another blind CPA test taker a few years after me, and now they finally offer it in screen reader or digitally accessible forms. But that said, anyways, finished up at DU, and then that's really what started my career in public accounting. Started with KPMG in the federal tax practice, spent 4 years there, and at that point really knew that I wanted to specialize and do something a little more like consulting based, and had the opportunity to work on some accounting methods and research credits, and knew that that's where I wanted to spend the majority of my time. So I unfortunately at KPMG, like I was splitting time and didn't have the opportunity to do that full time. So I um, took a position with Moss Adams here in Denver, and worked in that. Worked as a senior doing research and development credits for 2.5 years. And then just recently, as of about 2 months ago, accepted a position as a manager doing research credits over at PwC. And I've been doing that ever since. So that's kind of in a high level overview of kind of how I got to where I did, and some of the things that how I got to where I did in my career. But as I'll kind of talk now as to, some of the things that I've learned more so as a blind person, and just, tips for if you ever work with a blind person in an accounting career. I would say, one of the things that I've learned in my past almost 7 years that I've been in public accounting now, is the biggest barrier really to participation or to an accounting career for blind people is the accessibility of software, and think of like digital accessibility. So when I'm working through a tax return or an Excel file or credit calculation, any sort of thing like that, I'm always using a screen reader software, which is called JAWS. And there's other screen readers. That's the most popular one that most people are going to be using. And it's essentially verbalizing and providing me feedback on each page, what's on each page of that return, what's on each line, or in the spreadsheet of what's in each cell reference. Can drill down in, see the formulas. And I mean, that's really what I use for everything on my computer, from sending email to just searching something on the web, and it verbally reads everything back, or in theory it verbally reads everything back. There are certainly softwares that are developed that for whatever reason aren't developed in a manner that a screen reading software can pick up the information in them. And that was one thing that I found in with a lot of accounting softwares, right? Because I was just saying there's not a lot of blind accountants out there. It's maybe not on the software manufacturers forefront of their mind when they're developing it. So a lot of times you see things that are developed that are not accessible, as opposed to where I think lawyers, there's, more tends to be, as kind of a fact, more blind lawyers out there. And if some of the like legal research stuff that they develop is not accessible, all these companies get a lot more pushback a lot faster, just because there's more blind lawyers to do that than there are accountants. And that said, I think like when I started at KPMG, it was like just to change one thing, like in the tax software, would take like a ridiculous amount of time to like change a couple of lines on the return. So I was really lucky to be with a big four firm where we did a lot of outsourcing, and so I was able to kind of review the returns fine, and then it would go back to our I don't remember what we called it, but essentially center that was offshore, that they had people that were able to easily make the changes in the software, and then I would just, once they made it, go through it, review it again, and make sure it was good to go. But that said too, like a lot of internally developed work paper software also would definitely pose some unique challenges for me. Excel was completely usable, was and still is completely accessible and usable. But when you see a lot of this like online Excel and stuff like that, that is starting to be used more and more, some of those softwares can pose an issue with a screen reader, all the way to, I would say, another software like right now that I'm using is like our time and expense entry at PwC. Like it does, just for whatever reason, doesn't work. So like I have to have somebody enter in my time. So I think, that said, like, I mean, I know I spent, gave 3 examples of things that didn't work, but there's always been, I mean, I feel like one thing that like kind of blazing the trail into the accounting profession has allowed me the opportunity to do is to kind of be a problem solver and be like, okay, like if this one piece of software doesn't work, what I like, need to think of some good workarounds, and then kind of go back to whoever my manager in the firm is and say, hey, can we try this maybe instead? And then just moving to a couple of other things, like in that I've learned as an accountant, is that obviously haven't worked well for me, is the color coding. Accounting's can be, but it doesn't need to be, a very visual thing. I'm sure a lot of you have um, projects that maybe you've reviewed something and color coded your Excel a certain way. Well, when I'm looking through a huge workbook and it's color coded, it doesn't really help me. So to be able to identify things quickly. So I've always like had to, think of ways to get more creative, instead of using color, like how can we maybe like include the cell references that you want me to look at, and things like that. I would say like it's definitely been a learning experience in the virtual world, right? Because the most common thing that, whether it's accounting or not, the most common thing that like when that people do is, if you're on a call like this, will share their screen or throw like some PowerPoint slides up on the screen. So if I'm in a Zoom meeting with somebody, like I don't have access to any of the information that's shared on the screen. So I mean, obviously in PowerPoint slides, like a lot of times, like for maybe CPE or whatever internal things, it's not a huge deal. Like I can get most of the information, but it's just like, I think, when you're working with somebody and they want to share their screen, I always kind of have to be like, no, like, let me open the workbook and then let me know where you're at in the particular workbook, and we can kind of go through it that way. But it's just, the screen share, like for me, is just not a great thing. So that's kind of, I mean, I've kind of gone through a lot of information. Is there any questions before I kind of go into a few other subjects?
So Caitlin writes, and you've already addressed some of this, Cody, what kinds of accommodations have helped you succeed?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think I have addressed a significant amount of that. Trying to think, outside of the software, is the biggest accommodation. Without that, I mean, it would be impossible for me to access a computer at all. But it's just, a lot of it is being able to problem solve and bring solutions to management when I've had questions. And luckily, I mean, everywhere that I've worked, there's been, a big push in the accounting industry, which I'm happy of, for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I feel like all the firms that I've worked for have really embraced the idea of having a blind accountant on staff, and have really been willing to kind of be creative and think of outside of the box solutions for any problems with the digital accessibility of things that I've ran into as it relates to performing my job. There's maybe other minor things, but digital accessibility is, and for probably many years will be, the biggest challenge for blind accountants. Is kind of on an unrelated note, but kind of similar, is when I um when I had started in accounting at KPMG and Moss Adams, I was the first blind accountant at either of those firms. And kind of having worked through, like, people had reached out to me, that were blind and studying for the CPA while I was at those firms, and I kind of got the chance to mentor them a little bit, talk to them about my experiences. And the funny thing is, a couple of them ended up at PwC. So when I went over to PwC, I was like the third blind accountant there. So it kind of reversed itself. The first couple days started, and I was messaging them, hey, being like, hey, do you guys remember me? We talked a few years ago. I'm at PwC now. I don't know how to do this. Can you give me some guidance on it?
So Professor Greiman, as you know, is on today, and she asks, are you still active in the Blind Students Association? As I recall, you were in a leadership position.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm still active with a general organization, not necessarily so much from a student perspective anymore, but I am involved in the National Federation of the Blind of Colorado. And essentially what the organization's, I'm in a office or role on the board for that organization. And essentially what their mission is to do things that and undertake projects that increase the equality of life for blind individuals via like advocacy and education. I think the unemployment rate of blind individuals is about 70%. So if you compare that to the national unemployment rate, there's still a lot of work to do around employment for blind people. And if you think about it, I mean, employment is, I mean, unemployment leads to poverty and leads to lack of opportunity in society for blind people. So we take on, I've been involved with, to some degree or another, with that organization since I graduated high school, in a student leadership role, and then just in a leadership role in the general organization, just because, you know, their mission means a lot to me. It's really important that we do things and undertake efforts to decrease that unemployment rate of blind people. And I would say without, like, the one of the things that being in that organization helped me with is I actually got to attend a school in Littleton, Colorado for 2 months, the Colorado Center for the Blind. And it was a program. The program is actually meant to be done in 9 months. And if I should have stayed for 9 months, but I had a lot of scholarship money on the table at the time. So I tried to do like an abbreviated program and only did it in a summer program there. But really what their program does, and it's run by the National Federation of the Blind, is it teaches blind people four different subsets of things, one being Braille, the other being adaptive technology, like think like the screen readers that and the JAWS software that I mentioned before, which were really my two strongest going into the program. And the other two being just like general home management as a blind person, like how do you know how to cook a hamburger and tell when it's done if you can't see it? How do you know how to do a good job of cleaning when you can't actually see it? And things like that. I mean, that really covers a wide gamut of, really can be anything that, I mean, how do you tie a tie? How do you iron your clothes and make sure they look good? And then the fourth arm of the program is in cane travel. So like, how do you travel successfully with a white cane? How do you, if you don't know how to get somewhere, how do you figure it? I mean, nowadays we're lucky we have Lyft and Uber, which has been really helpful for me as a blind person. But and when I was a college student, if there was somewhere that you wanted to go and you didn't have anybody to drive you, you had to walk or take the bus. So if you don't know that exact route, like how do you use other skills and use your other senses to figure out where you're trying to go? So that was really helpful to me. Like I needed a lot of guidance in those areas, and it helped me to meet a lot of other successful blind people that were holding jobs. You know, unfortunately, no accountants. I would have loved to meet an accountant, but met some lawyers, some people who work for the government, things like that, and just people that, like, you know, as general questions came up that I didn't have answers to, that I could just give them a call and be like, hey, have you ever run into this? And like, how should I do this? Like, and that was really helpful to me.
So Cody, Alicia writes, in general, as professionals progress in a career, there's a focus on emotional intelligence, which can include picking up on nonverbal communications. How have you handled this component of communication, and what would be helpful for others to understand in working with other blind professionals in this regard?
Yeah, you know, that's a really good question. And to some extent, the answer is like, is that for, I mean, if it's nonverbal communication, like a lot of times I'm going to miss out on it. And I think, you know, I mean, you cannot, there's some verbal cues that you can, I mean, by tone and inflection of the voice, that maybe you can pick up on a person's communication style. But I mean, yeah, a lot of times, like, if it's non-verbal communication, you're not going to get it. Like, I mean, I was on a Zoom call the other day, and people are doing the thing where they would say to do like a thumbs up if you agreed with something. And I was like sitting there looking for the thumbs up reaction in Zoom, and really what people were doing is just putting their thumb up in front of their camera.
I would imagine
Yes,
it's
Cody,
very
I
challenging
actually
in a
did that
Zoom.
to you. I remember catching myself doing it as well. Excuse me, Alicia, you were commenting.
No, I would just imagine it's completely different, even in a virtual world, now that so many people, including all of us on this call, put yourself on mute. So you don't even hear the verbal responses. So
Yeah, I mean, a
know that you're
virtual
completely
world
engaged.
definitely poses some challenges too. I mean, it's not anymore either where we have this dress code where we go into the office and it's business casual. It's like now we're trying to figure out, what other people are people dressing up for videos. So in that case, I mean, you just kind of err on the side of caution. But I mean, yeah, I mean, it's definitely posed some challenges from those respects.
So Cody, you mentioned that when you joined KPMG and when you joined Moss Adams, you were the only blind CPA. I'm often curious about what that is like from a expectation of representing the community perspective, what kinds of things were you expected to be able to do or represent when you were the only one?
That's a tough question because I could answer it from several angles, but I think in it was tough, but it was really cool too because in that respective, like I mean, I just felt like I had to go to work every day and do a good job and work hard and be, I mean, show that I was capable and really, I mean, be able to because in a way of representing the community, if we want more blind people to be hired into the accounting profession, I mean, it did in a way put a lot on my shoulders to perform well.
Yeah, I can only imagine what a joy it is to be at PwC where you're one of three.
Yeah.
That makes a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does. And I think, I mean, still, like, I mean, you take a big firm like PwC size, even though there's three, like, a lot of them, like, haven't worked. There's still a lot of people in the firm that have never worked with a blind person. And I always think it's funny on from a virtual perspective too, we don't always, it's not like we're going into the office. Like if you meet me in the office, it's pretty apparent that I'm a blind person. But if we're on a video call or on the phone, it's not as apparent. And I probably don't always, I mean, tell all of my clients from a virtual perspective, just if it's relevant to the conversation, I might, but if it's not, then I might not. But I know the other day I had a partner that sent me something and it was all color code, and I was like, actually, by the way, like I can't see the color. Would you be able to like describe this better? And he was just, at that point like, oh, like had I known, I would have done that, but I just didn't realize. And I was like, got thinking about it. I was like, well, I mean, all of our conversations have been so fast and like to the point that like you just never really got a chance to bring it up in conversation.
So remember, everyone, you are welcome to post comments and questions in the chat, as well as to unmute yourself and turn on your camera for the rest of us. I know, Cody, it's not going to matter much to you, but in case you're wondering, most people don't have their cameras on today. We're either seeing the black box with a typed name or we're seeing a photo. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions of Cody as well. So I encourage you to do that. Cody, you started the questions rolling when you said, are there any questions before I talk about some other things? So let's go back to the other things you have on your list.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's kind of the other thing is just kind of, definitely some of the things that like I think in the CPA profession I've definitely seen a lot more increase kind of buy-in to diversity, equity, inclusion throughout the 7 years that I've been in the profession. I think that's great. I've always been lucky enough to kind of be involved in at every firm that I've been at in their DE&I efforts. And at KPMG, we had the Abilities in Motion group, and we kind of formed that in Denver. And I mean, it just covered such a wide breadth of things. And then at Moss Adams, I was also kind of involved in their disability business resource group, and have just gotten involved at PwC. And I think, these groups really have made a difference in the profession. I think, even been involved for the past few months now in the COCPA's DE&I group. And I think, a lot of these conversations that we're having are really important, because if there's not, people that are willing to speak about things like digital accessibility or any other issue, it just doesn't, in my mind, it won't ever get done. So we have to have people that are willing to advocate for them. And eventually, I think the hope would be that we do such a good job advocating for these issues that they're just second thought, and not something that in 10 or 20 or 30 years that we even have to spend time talking about anymore, because it's something that we did a long time ago, and now it's just forefront of everybody's thought. But I think, like, and kind of some of the differences that I've seen in being a larger firm, like, and a lot of the big four firms, they develop their own software, and they've are starting to onboard a lot of people that kind of specialize in accessibility. So if, we can get that those connections with the software development team, I mean, it should be a good path forward. Whereas I think, even the mid-sized firms, even though they don't develop a lot of their own software, like a lot of these software companies, it's finally starting to be something that, before they sell it in the marketplace, they're starting to think about, because it's something that the marketplace is starting to demand. So I think, there's just over the past 7 years alone, there's been a lot of good movement in the D&I space as it relates to accessibility, which, I think makes sense. Like, I mean, you hear, I mean, everywhere you look now, you hear that there's a shortage of accountants. So you have this group of people that still experiences 70% unemployment. And I mean, if you can make it possible for more blind people to be involved in accounting, there's more opportunity to help with that unemployment rate, and just the diversity in the accounting profession overall.
So, Professor Greiman, if you're still here, which I think you are, what would you say about working with people who are interested in the accounting profession from the educator's perspective? She might have had to leave, so forgive me if I've just thrown a question out there. Well, then, you know what? We're going to turn it around.
I'm still here, Mary.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry.
Could you summarize that question again, please?
Sure. From your perspective as an educator, what would you tell the group here about working with students who need special accommodation, especially if they happen to be blind?
Well, I think Cody could probably answer this better than I could, but the advocating for themselves, like he spoke about, perhaps to be more proactive, to offer things that aren't automatically advocated for yet. What would you say to that, Cody?
Yeah, so I guess the question is kind of directed at from like an educator's perspective, Mary.
Well, I'm
clarify.
curious. I asked it of Professor Greiman first from the educator perspective, but also from your perspective. going through the educational process, what kinds of things did you have to deal with or address or overcome or be really proactive about so that you could pursue your accounting studies and your career choice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, college was really hard for me, but it was also one of the, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like I didn't like college either, because it's also one of the best times of my life. Like, I learned a lot and had a lot of opportunities. But I would say, from just like the key is really learning how to advocate. And like, I would say, like, the process for me at the time, like in high school, like they did all that for me. In college, like I had to order my textbooks, and the university would scan them, so I had to order them in plenty of time for them to do that. And there were just things that, like, there were some software barriers that I ran into as well. So it was kind of having to work with somebody to kind of work around those. But I think advocating is really the key, and not getting in a situation where just don't have the time to advocate. Because so maybe what I would say to that is, if an assignment, you have a week to do an assignment, it's due a week from today, maybe don't start it on Tuesday night, because if you have some sort of accessibility issue, you're kind of out of luck at that point.
Yeah, good advice for all of us, regardless, right? You never know when you're going to have a complication at the last minute. Stephanie writes in the chat, Cody, you have such a great outlook on life given your disability. Have you ever felt angry that you were born blind, and how have you overcome these thoughts?
That's a good question. I don't really think I ever really have. I guess for me, like, I don't know, maybe if I had lost my vision later in life, it would be different, but I've never really known any other way of living. So it just kind of became the normal for me. And I don't know, like I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely there are times that I've thought that maybe I had to work a little bit harder than some of my peers. But I mean, other than that, I've been able to kind of overcome most of the obstacles that have been put in my way, and have, I mean, occur, like, I don't know, I mean, I guess one way to look at it, right, is if I hadn't been born blind, and I was sighted similar to my sister, what would have my career outlook been? Would have I gone to college, or would have I just, I mean, hopped on whatever easy job I could get and tried to work my way up there, and maybe not had as successful of a career, just because it would have been easier for me to get employed right out of high school and start making money. And then I don't know, I guess, as I think about it some more, like I mean, even as a blind person, like I've had a lot of really cool opportunities in life, like through work, and just kind of developed a lot of cool hobbies. I traveled around London and the UK for 2 weeks by myself, just kind of bounced around, like in 2019 pre-COVID. So that was really cool. I really like traveling. It's probably one of my biggest hobbies. Also, like skiing, and any other outdoor activities. Skied quite a bit of mountains out here with a guide, and it's always a good time. As well as like running with a guide, and it's always something that I've really enjoyed as well. Other than that, big sports fan, and I mean, pretty much, even being blind, I mean, led, pretty normal life, into a lot of the same hobbies as a lot of my other coworkers and friends.
Yeah, Barb writes, you don't let anything in capital letters hold you back. Really wonderful to hear your inspiring story. And Stephanie tags on with, thank you for sharing, Cody. I'm sitting here thinking back to something you said early on about working for your dad, tearing shingles off of roofs with a shovel, and using the shovel edge to help you know you were getting close to a roof edge. I'm getting the impression that your dad and probably your mom too were like, you can do whatever you want to do. Is that impression accurate?
Yeah,
Sounds
they
like it
were.
just
And I mean, they always
that way.
encouraged me, and always had big dreams and hopes and plans for me. I don't know if mom knew as much about how we were doing things on the roof as much as dad did, but I think, yeah, I mean, my parents always had big hopes and dreams for me. I think, like, that said though, right, like they didn't know any blind people, so although they had them, like they didn't really know how I was going to achieve them. And that's where like a lot of like my training that I mentioned about at the Colorado Center for the Blind, and a lot of the other friends that I met, like were so helpful to me. And they, like, if I had a question on something, from, I don't know, how to figure something out, like college related, or I mean, something as similar as to how to cross a busy street. Like I had other people that I could ask, and they'd be like, okay, like this is how I would recommend you do it. And where, my parents, even though they had those hopes and dreams, like there's, I mean, those were just things that, right, they didn't necessarily know themselves.
Yeah. So what would you say are don'ts that sighted people ought to pay attention to when interacting with, working with, being friends with a blind person?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the first one, right, is, and this sounds even kind of weird that I'm saying this as I say it, but there's no reason to talk louder. You would be surprised how many people actually do that, though. I would say this, a couple of other things that come to mind is like I mean, I think it's always kind of think it's funny when people get like so caught up in their language and using the words like see or look over there, or did you see the Broncos game last Sunday, or did you watch it? It's not like, I definitely don't say, yeah, I listen to the Broncos games. I mean, see and watch are kind of, interchangeable terms that we all use, whether we're actually seeing something or not. So, I mean, that type of terminology is fine. I would say, not to just, I mean, always feel free to ask if someone needs help, but don't necessarily assume that they do. Then I would say, just don't just like walk up behind somebody and grab them and kind of direct them in a way. Like the typical correct way to guide is to actually have the person that you're guiding grab your elbow.
So is it a fair assumption that when you went to the night at the Rockies game, you were listening to the announcer and the commentator?
Yeah, I mean, I did some, like in a group networking event, it's a little harder, right? Because, you're chatting with people and stuff. But yeah, I mean, if I'm going to a game to watch it, a lot of times, like I'll put an earpiece in or something and kind of, so I can keep up and, understand what's going on.
So what are the do's?
Oh man, I would say, just make sure like in your firm, if you have, blind people, make sure that, I mean, we're included, in all the activities that the company is putting on, or the lunches, happy hours, all that fun stuff. And then, really just like making sure to that if there, I think it's helpful, if there's something going on in the room that like is visual that we're not going to get, kind of describe it. Or if you're giving a presentation and there's blind people, to kind of, just describe certain aspects of the presentation if if the visual is important to what you're trying to convey. So if you are maybe doing a PowerPoint, kind of describe your PowerPoint a little bit. There's kind of a balance in describing though, because I've definitely been in presentations too, where I've seen people that have tried to over describe, and it like just kind of gets to be too much and can kind of slow down the meeting. Like I know that was on a Zoom meeting where everybody, there were a few blind people on it, and everybody was describing like what they're wearing and how they appeared in the camera. And I was like, that took 20 minutes of the meeting that we could have done something way more effective, because there's something like I didn't really even care at that point. Like, I mean, I think if somebody's wearing, something that's important to the presentation, that's great to describe it. But I mean, the fact that somebody has on a blue sweatshirt and jeans, and to hear that 20 times is just, I don't know, not super relevant sometimes to the presentation.
Yeah, and to that point, how do you see what you cannot see right now is that I am holding up my fingers and doing quotation marks with them. How do you see color if you have never seen color?
I mean, I think color's like mostly irrelevant to me. Like people have told me like, what colors match and stuff. And so it's important, obviously, from that perspective, but like to really conceptualize it, other than like the descriptions that people have given me, is not easy for me. But I definitely like try to kind of obviously keep a map out of like what colors match and stuff, because it's important. Even if you are blind, it's important to go to a meeting in matching clothes, or to go to a nice event in matching clothes, or to, I don't know, like I bought a house a few months ago and wanted to repaint the kitchen, so I had to have some sort of idea with what I had in the kitchen, with what we had in the kitchen, what would go good with that in order to do that.
Yeah, it is a really important insight, isn't it, to think about what's possible to even describe that's meaningful. When you said don't over describe, I thought, yeah, there are lots of things that just don't matter, that everybody else thinks matter, but in fact don't. So Caitlin asks, how have people treated you differently because you're blind?
It's a hard question. I mean, there's definitely been times. I mean, I would say, I don't know, it's hard to think of one real good specific example, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I think it's just there, I guess, like, without, I mean, it's kind of a general statement, but there's kind of, I feel like been a lot of general assumptions made that maybe something would be harder for me to do. And, you don't get necessarily that opportunity, whether it be, that could be something that you really want to do. Like, I don't know, maybe, for instance, like going to having to go somewhere that's super far away, or like, and trying to learn like a new location. I think there's been times that people have kind of doubted maybe my ability to do that, or even, I mean, something more simple than that, like to go get my own lunch. I feel like I've probably had people doubt my ability to do. But yeah, I mean, the answer to that question is yes. And I mean, really hard to, come up with a lot more specific examples.
Yeah, so don't assume you can't. Give you the opportunity to choose.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Stephanie asks, have you ever had an IQ test? I can't help but wonder if you test higher than average, and this has helped you be so successful.
I've never had an IQ test. I don't know if I really think that my IQ is higher than everybody else's, but I think, it's like, I mean, I think there's certain things that I have to think about more. And it's like kind of the example that I'm sure a lot of you have heard, that, right, blind people have better hearing than their sighted counterparts. Well, I don't even really know if that's true. Like, I don't know how you test. I mean, there probably is a way to test hearing acuity. I don't know what it is, but I think a lot of it, when you are missing one sense, say your sight, you're relying on your hearing more. So it's not necessarily that people are not able to hear things that you are, but you're just thinking about it more, so you hear them. So I think, I don't know, it might be kind of a similar concept with IQ.
So I'm going to give you a hint about that, Cody, and everyone else as well, because as a result of our Lead Fit program, our facilitator does a little exercise every single time around where people in accounting think they fall on the intelligence spectrum, whether they've been tested or not. There is science associated with it, of course, and almost always the majority of the people in the class, and the majority of the people I suspect on this call as well, put themselves as of average, normal, just like everybody else, intelligence, which is kind of what you just said. And in fact, you are much higher up in the spectrum than that. Most people in accounting are at the much higher level of IQ, because you have to be able to do the kind of work you do. And you tend to underestimate your intelligence because you are around a bunch of other people who are highly intelligent as well. And so it feels normal, right? I mean, you know who the brainiac is in your network of people, but everybody else is pretty much, other than the brainiac and the person who feels like maybe you should have picked something else, you all feel like you're about the same, and you're in fact highly intelligent. So tuck that away.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. So Barb writes, if you hadn't chosen accounting for your career, what other profession or professions do you think you might be doing instead?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Well, I don't know. When I was growing up, I mean, construction was always an interest of mine. And like, I don't know, kind of, I mean, it's still, I mean, I'm interested in how things are built. And I mean, some of the cool things, for any of you who are familiar with the R&D tax credit, is, yeah, there's a tax side to it too, but there's also, kind of a human interaction side, and figuring out, like, I mean, get to meet with a lot of really cool companies that are doing cool things. And I mean, a lot of it is just sitting down and talking with these really smart people, whether it be engineers or tech people or winemakers, and figuring out, okay, like, and I'm just telling you the story of how they make their product. And then, at that point, my job's really to figure out, like, how it qualifies for the tax credit. But that said, I mean, I get to learn a lot of really cool things too. And I think I've always been, a little bit like fascinated with construction and how things go together. I've always been kind of interested in real estate as well, because my parents did that. Recently bought a house about 6 months ago, and kind of did a decent amount of work to that to get it to where I wanted it to be, to live in. And I mean, I don't know, like, it's always been kind of a side interest of mine. And then I think, when I went to the tax program, like, I really realized like how interesting a career in law could be too. And that's one of the things that I really like about, the R&D work as well, is it's kind of the best of all worlds. Like, you get to a lot of legal analysis, as you know, like Section 41 of the Internal Revenue Code and Section 174, in my opinion, some of the most gray sections of the Internal Revenue Code that are out there. And so, I mean, it's really about kind of playing in the gray and crafting your position and being ready to support it, as well as, you have to understand the accounting, and you really, I mean, get to learn a lot about whether it be engineering or just all sorts of businesses. So I mean, maybe that's kind of how I got to where I got. But I mean, those are, some definite other things that I have interest in.
So Cody, thank you. I think you just proved my point that you are gifted. So another Mary, a different Mary asks, oop, let me get back to it. Sisters tend to mother their brothers. How did your sister try to help you, or did she try to help you overcome obstacles?
I think, you know, like there was like my sister definitely looked out for me when we were kids in school and stuff. That said, there was definitely like a lot of competition being twins too. Like if one of us did something, the other one of us wanted to do it as well. So like, I don't know, like, I mean, I always hear these horror stories from other people that were blind or had disabilities in high school, and talking about, you know, how it was really hard to make friends, and you know, they got bullied and stuff in school. And I was always, I mean, not a few incidents, but I mean, I was always lucky. Like, I mean, I always had my group of friends in high school in New York that I hung out with. And then when I came back out to Colorado, I was a junior in high school and kind of had to start all over again. I was a wrestler. I wrestled since competitively in high school, and had participated in the sport ever since I was probably like 9 or 10, or even maybe younger than that. And kind of started hanging out with some of the guys on the team. And I don't know, like, there's just like my sister had friends and like couldn't when we were kids, and so it's like competitive for me to go out and figure out like how to make friends too. Or like, I don't know, even in school, like we're a little bit competitive sometimes.
Oh, Judy writes, do you think it's easier to successfully cope in a sighted world if you are born blind, or if you become blind later in life, in your opinion?
I don't know. I think everybody, when I think about like a lot of the blind people that I know, I mean, everybody's a little bit of a different case. I mean, I've known people that have gone blind in their late 30s and 40s. And I mean, obviously had to, you know, kind of pivot their life to function as a blind person, but have done fine as it. I know people that have grown up, been born blind, and, you know, had successful and fine careers. And I've known people that have grown up blind that have struggled with it more, and, you know, not unfortunately not been as successful. So I think, I don't know, I mean, it's a lot of it really depends on, it's more of an individualized thing, I think. But I mean, I think, you know, if you go blind later in life, you do have some things that, I mean, as a sighted person, that you would have seen that, you know, you could relate back to, and some of that might be helpful. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
So
guess,
go
oh,
ahead,
sorry,
Judy.
Mary.
No, go ahead.
I guess I was kind of thinking about what Mary was asking about color, and how if you had never seen color, what is your frame of reference? And so I was thinking if you become blind later in life, you have kind of a frame of reference as far as when someone says something, you can say, oh, I remember, or whatever, what that is. So even something like as simple as, and simple, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, you know, the chair over there is round or something like that. It's difficult if you've never seen round to necessarily, and Cody, I know that you can feel round, etc., so that makes a frame of reference, but it's different than somebody who's seen round or diamond or whatever. So it's a different frame of reference. But by the same token, if you've had that frame of reference and you become blind, I can't help but wonder if you have some resentment later in life that you've lost that frame of reference. And I know that you've had far more interaction probably with the blind community than any of the rest of us have. So just kind of getting your take on whether it's easier to cope if you've never had that, or if it's easier to cope if you have that and you can remember back. So I appreciate you saying that it's really individual.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I think it's really individual, but I think, in some cases, like that phase of reference can be really helpful for some people, and just figuring out like that, colors a little bit better, or even like if in given directions, if, they know the layout of the town or something. I mean, yeah, there can definitely be advantages in that.
Yeah, it's always based on the individual, isn't it? So there was this really fun little chat thing that was going on, Cody, as you were talking about the Internal Revenue Code sections, and I'm talking about how you're gifted. Stephanie writes, "You sound like Professor Greiman citing sections," and Professor Greiman writes back, "Doesn't everybody cite codes and how interesting they are?" I think there's a wonderful opportunity there to put a small group together that just really enjoys doing that. Stephanie just wrote back, "No, not everybody does that. LOL." Oh, Cody,
I'm lucky anymore these days. I only really work in two sections of the code, 41 and 174. But I can still remember some other sections.
no doubt. I want you to know that of the people who actually have their cameras on, everybody is smiling or chuckling or laughing, even if you can't hear anybody except for me. And I hope you can hear the smile in my voice. It is such a treat to spend time with you always, and especially meaningful, I know, to me and everyone else, I'm sure, to have the opportunity to hear your story and to ask the questions and to get to know you as well. Thank you so much, Cody, for being willing to participate in our See Me series. We really, really appreciate you doing it. I'd
Yeah,
like to remind
absolutely.
everyone that the next one, and now all kinds of thank you Codys are coming into the chat, by the way, and so impressed, as is no surprise. The next one is August 31st, and we'll have Leanne Browder with Moss Adams with us to talk about what does age have to do with it in the accounting profession. It's a focus on ageism and what the potential diversity, equity, and inclusion issues are around the number of different age ranges that we have in the profession now and how that can play out. But before I say any more, I want to make sure I share with you, Cody, what Professor Greiman has just posted. I'm so happy to see your success. You are very accomplished. And she is right. You are. It's got to make an educator proud.
Well, thanks.
Lots and lots of thank yous. So just remember that if you've been here before, we tend to have these the last Wednesday of the month from noon to 1:15 Mountain Time. You can register for them at cocpa.org. And also that we post the recordings after the programs so that if you are interested in going back and listening to previous stories that have been told, you can do that on the website as well. I hope those of you who are here for the first time will come back. And those of you who are regulars, we look forward to hearing you and seeing you in the future. Thank you, everyone, and a special thank you to you, Cody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.